The coffee shop smelled like burnt sugar and wet cardboard every morning at 6:15. I'd learned to arrive early, before the rush, before the noise of the city swallowed the last quiet moments I could claim as mine. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that made my already pale skin look almost translucent. I caught my reflection in the chrome napkin dispenser as I wiped down tables. Blonde hair pulled back in a braid that had seen better days, dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide anymore. Being an Omega in a pack that didn't want you was like existing in a state of perpetual apology. I'm sorry for being born wrong. I'm sorry for not being strong enough. I'm sorry for taking up space. The rejection had come 3 months ago, formal and cold, delivered by our alpha in front of the entire pack during the autumn gathering. Your designation serves no purpose here, he'd said, not even looking at me directly. We need strength. We need warriors. Not whatever this is. Whatever this is. The words still burned, so I'd left. Packed what little I owned into a duffel bag, and took the first bus into the city, where the concrete and steel created enough interference that pack bonds couldn't reach. Where I could pretend to be human, just another struggling 20-something trying to make rent. The bell above the door chimed. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. Same time, every single morning for the past 6 weeks. The woman moved like she was carrying the weight of several lifetimes on her shoulders. Slow, deliberate, exhausted in a way that transcended the physical. She wore expensive clothes that hung wrong on her frame, as if she'd recently lost weight. And her dark hair was always pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. Human, I'd thought at first. But there was something else there. Something that made my Omega instincts prickle with awareness. A predator, definitely, but what kind, I couldn't tell. The city dulled my senses, made everything fuzzy around the edges. Good morning, I said softly, the same greeting I offered every day. She never responded, never even acknowledged I'd spoken. But I'd learned her routine. Black coffee, no sugar, no cream. She'd sit at the corner table by the window, the one with the wobbly leg I kept meaning to fix, and she'd stare out at the street for exactly 45 minutes before leaving. She never brought a phone, never brought a book, just sat there, alone with whatever thoughts made her look so utterly, devastatingly lonely. I knew that look. Wore it myself most days, so I'd started doing small things, making sure her table was extra clean, bringing her coffee 30 seconds faster than anyone else's, leaving a napkin folded into a neat square beside her cup, because I'd noticed she liked things organized, precise. Today, I added something new. The bakery down the street made these little almond croissants that smelled like heaven. I'd spent money I shouldn't have spent, bought one with my employee discount, and now I placed it carefully on a small plate beside her coffee. On the house, I said quietly. For the first time in 6 weeks, she looked directly at me. Her eyes were amber. Not brown, not hazel. True amber, like honey held up to sunlight. And ancient. God, they were ancient, carrying centuries in their depths. My breath caught in my throat. Vampire. The realization hit me like cold water. I'd been serving coffee to a vampire for 6 weeks, and I'd been too dulled by city noise and my own misery to notice. I should have been terrified. Vampires didn't frequent human coffee shops. They didn't sit alone looking melancholy. They certainly didn't let themselves be served by rejected Omegas who could barely afford rent. You do this every morning, she said. Her voice was like smoke, dark and curling. Clean my table. Bring my coffee quickly. Watch me when you think I'm not looking. My heart hammered against my ribs. I'm sorry. I didn't mean... Why? The question hung in the air between us. Why did I bother? Why did I care? She was a stranger. She'd never even acknowledged my existence until this moment. Because... I struggled to find words that didn't make me sound pathetic. Because you look like you need someone to notice you're here. And I know what it's like when nobody does. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening around her eyes that made her look less like a predator and more like someone who'd forgotten what kindness looked like. What's your name? She asked. Elena. Elena, she repeated, tasting the syllables. I'm Cassandra. She paused, her gaze moving over my face with an intensity that made me want to look away. But I didn't. Couldn't. "You're Omega." Not a question. A statement. I nodded, my throat tight. "And you're alone." Another nod. "Rejected?" The word was a knife, quick and precise. I flinched but didn't lie. "Yes." Cassandra was quiet for a long moment, her amber eyes never leaving mine. The coffee shop continued its morning rhythm around us. The hiss of the espresso machine, the chatter of early commuters, the endless shuffle of feet. But in our corner, time seemed to slow, stretched thin like honey dripping from a spoon. "Rejection is a particular kind of death," she said finally. "The kind where you keep breathing anyway." I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes and blinked them back furiously. I didn't cry anymore, couldn't afford to. Crying meant acknowledging the pain, and acknowledging the pain meant drowning in it. "Thank you," Cassandra said, gesturing to the croissant. "But I don't eat." Of course she didn't. Vampire. "I know," I admitted. "I just wanted you to have something anyway." She stared at the pastry for a long moment, then back at me. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that made the air feel heavy. "I have a proposition for you, Elena." My pulse quickened. Nothing good ever came from vampires making propositions to vulnerable Omegas. Every instinct I had screamed danger. But there was something else there too, a desperate, hungry hope that maybe, just maybe, someone was offering me a lifeline. "I live with others like me," Cassandra continued. "A coven, though we don't use that term. We prefer family. We've been together for a very long time, and we've become stagnant, isolated. We've forgotten what it means to have someone who sees us as anything other than monsters." She leaned forward slightly, and I caught the scent of night-blooming jasmine and old books. "You see me?" she said simply. "Every morning you see me. Not what I am, but who I am. I'm offering you a place in our household. Not as food," she added quickly, seeing my expression. "As family. We need—" She hesitated, as if the admission cost her something. "We need someone who remembers how to be gentle, how to care. We've lived too long in darkness." My mind reeled. Was she serious? Offering me, a rejected Omega with nothing to my name, a place in a vampire coven? "Why me?" I whispered. "Because you brought me a croissant you couldn't afford, expecting nothing in return. Because you've shown me more kindness in 6 weeks than I've experienced in 6 decades. Because—" Her voice dropped even lower. "Because I know what rejection feels like, and I won't let you face it alone anymore." The coffee shop bell chimed again. Morning rush was starting. My manager would be here soon, expecting me to handle the counter. My tiny apartment with its leaking ceiling and hostile neighbors waited for me at the end of another long shift. My life stretched ahead of me like a gray road with no destination, just endless walking toward nothing. "I don't know anything about living with vampires," I said, my voice shaking. "And we don't know anything about living with an Omega. I suppose we'll learn together." Cassandra stood, pulling a card from her coat pocket and placing it on the table. It was cream-colored, expensive paper, with an address written in elegant script. "Think about it," she said. "If you decide yes, come to this address tomorrow night after sunset. Bring whatever you want to keep. Leave the rest behind." She walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at me. In the morning light streaming through the window, she looked both eternal and impossibly tired. "Elena, that thing your pack said, about you serving no purpose?" Her amber eyes held mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. They were wrong. Then she was gone, leaving me standing in the middle of the coffee shop with a business card in my trembling hand and a decision that felt too big for my small, broken life. I looked down at the address. It was in the old district, where the historic homes crouched behind iron gates and ancient trees, where people with old money and older secrets lived behind walls that kept the modern world at bay. A place where a rejected Omega might disappear completely, or might finally be found. I didn't sleep that night. The card sat on my nightstand, cream-colored and innocent, like it wasn't offering to completely upend what little stability I'd managed to scrape together. My studio apartment felt smaller than usual. the walls pressing in with their water-stained wallpaper, and the persistent drip from the bathroom faucet I couldn't afford to fix. Through the thin walls, I could hear my neighbor's television blaring some late-night infomercial, and above me, footsteps paced back and forth in an endless, maddening rhythm. This was my life now. This was what rejection had reduced me to. I picked up the card for the 100th time, tracing my finger over the elegant script. The address meant nothing to me, but I'd looked it up on my phone. A grand Victorian house set back from the street, surrounded by wrought iron and old-growth trees. The kind of place that looked like it had stories embedded in every brick. What was I thinking? Moving in with vampires? I was an Omega without a pack, without protection, without any of the instincts that might keep me safe in a household of predators. Every rational thought screamed that this was insane, but Cassandra's words kept echoing in my mind. I won't let you face it alone anymore. When had anyone last said something like that to me? When had anyone last seen me as more than an inconvenience, a weakness, a mistake of genetics? By the time dawn crept through my single window, I'd made my decision. I called in sick to work, first time in 6 weeks, and spent the day packing. It didn't take long. Clothes, mostly, worn and practical. A few books I'd collected from thrift stores. A photograph of my mother, taken before she died, before I'd presented as Omega and disappointed everyone. That was it. 23 years of life fit into 2 duffel bags and a backpack. I left my key on the counter with a note for the landlord. I'd paid through the month. He could keep the deposit. The sun set at 7:45. I was standing at the bus stop by 8, my bags heavy on my shoulders and my heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. The old district was exactly as imposing as the photos suggested. Gas lamps lined the streets, actual gas lamps, maintained by people who cared about preserving history. The houses loomed behind their gates, dark windows like eyes watching my progress. My breath fogged in the October air, and fallen leaves crunched under my feet with each step. The address led me to a house that was somehow more and less than I'd imagined. 3 stories of Victorian architecture, painted a deep charcoal gray with black trim. The iron gate stood open, as if expecting me. A stone path wound through a garden that had been allowed to grow wild. Roses climbing over themselves, ivy consuming a fountain that no longer ran, herbs I couldn't name spilling across the walkway. I stood at the gate for a full 5 minutes before I could make myself move forward. The door opened before I could knock. Cassandra stood there, dressed differently than I'd seen her. Casual clothes, soft sweater, her dark hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back. She looked younger this way, though I knew that was an illusion. Vampires didn't age, didn't change. She'd looked like this for longer than my great-grandmother had been alive. "You came," she said, and there was something in her voice. Relief? Surprise? Hope? "I came," I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. She stepped aside, gesturing me in. "Welcome home, Elena. Home." The word hit me harder than it should have. The interior was stunning in a way that made my breath catch. Dark wood everywhere, floors, walls, ceiling beams, polished to a deep shine. Artwork covered the walls, originals by the look of them, landscapes and portraits in styles that spanned centuries. A grand staircase curved upward to the 2nd floor, its banister carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift in the lamplight. But it was also clearly lived in, books stacked on every available surface, blankets thrown over furniture, a chess game abandoned mid-play on a side table, empty wine glasses, blood, probably, not wine, sitting forgotten on the mantel. "The others are in the library," Cassandra said, taking one of my bags. "I should warn you, they're going to be curious. Some more welcoming than others, but I've made it clear that you're under my protection, and they'll respect that." My Omega instincts prickled at the mention of others, of being observed and judged. I wanted to bolt, to run back to my awful apartment and my minimum wage job, and my safe, miserable isolation. But Cassandra's hand was gentle on my shoulder, grounding me. "Breathe," she said softly. "They're family. Difficult sometimes, dramatic often, but family. You'll see." She led me through a hallway lined with more artwork, more books, more evidence of lives lived long and full. We stopped before a set of double doors, dark wood carved with what looked like vines and flowers. Cassandra knocked once, then opened them. The library was massive, 2 stories tall with a balcony running around the second level, accessible by a narrow spiral staircase. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, packed so full that books were stacked horizontally on top of vertical rows. The room smelled like old paper and leather, and that particular mustiness that comes from centuries of accumulated knowledge. 4 people looked up as we entered. The first was a woman sprawled across a velvet chaise lounge, reading what looked like a fashion magazine. She was stunning. Dark skin, natural hair styled in intricate braids woven with what looked like actual gold thread, wearing clothes that probably cost more than I'd made in the last year. She couldn't have been more than 25 when she was turned. Her eyes, when they met mine, were a deep brown that sparkled with intelligence and something else. Mischief, maybe. "Well," she said, her voice carrying a melodic quality that suggested she'd grown up speaking something other than English. "You weren't exaggerating, Cass. She does look like she needs about 6 meals and a very long nap." "Imara," Cassandra said warningly. "What?" "I'm being honest." Imara sat up, setting her magazine aside. "Come here. Let me look at you properly." I hesitated, but Cassandra gave me an encouraging nod. I took a few steps closer. Imara studied me with the intensity of someone appraising a piece of art. "Omega," she said finally. "Rejected by the smell of it. City living for 3 months, and you're malnourished. When's the last time you ate properly?" "I eat," I said defensively. "Coffee and whatever you can afford from the day-old bakery section doesn't count." She turned to Cassandra. "We're feeding her. Immediately." "We discussed this," Cassandra said. "Elena is not a project." "No, she's family. You said so yourself, and family doesn't let family waste away." Imara stood, and I realized she was tall, nearly 6 feet even without the heels she wore. "I'm Imara. I've been with this disaster of a coven for about 300 years, which makes me practically the baby of the group. Welcome to the madhouse, sweetheart." Her directness should have been off-putting, but there was something warm underneath it. Not pity. I'd had enough of that to last a lifetime, but genuine care wrapped in bluntness. "Thank you," I managed. A man spoke from the corner, his voice quiet and measured. "You'll have to forgive Imara. Subtlety has never been her strength." He sat in a high-backed chair by the fireplace, a book open in his lap. Unlike the others, there was nothing flashy about him. Simple, dark clothes, brown hair that looked perpetually in need of a cut, glasses that I suspected were more affectation than necessity. He looked like a professor, or maybe a librarian. Gentle, until you noticed the predatory stillness with which he held himself. "I'm Nathaniel," he said, offering a small smile. "It's nice to meet you, Elena. Cassandra has spoken highly of you." "Has she?" I glanced at Cassandra, who suddenly seemed very interested in adjusting one of the curtains. "Every day for the past 6 weeks, Nathaniel confirmed, a hint of amusement in his tone. Though she pretended she was merely observing human behavior, we knew better. Cassandra shot him a look that would have withered a lesser being. The third person was a young man, or at least young-appearing, perched on the arm of a leather sofa. He had that particular kind of beauty that seemed almost artificial. Sharp cheekbones, pale skin, hair so blonde it was nearly white, cut short and styled with casual precision. His eyes were ice blue, cold and assessing. He hadn't said anything yet, just watched me with an expression I couldn't read. "That's Sebastian," Imara said, following my gaze. "He's sulking because Cassandra made this decision without consulting the full coven first. Don't mind him. He sulks about everything." "I'm not sulking," Sebastian said, his accent British and upper class. "I'm being appropriately cautious. We know nothing about her except that she served Cassandra coffee with unusual consistency. And brought me a croissant I didn't ask for," Cassandra added. "Yes, clearly that qualifies her to live among vampires. Excellent vetting process, Cass." The tension in the room shifted, sharpened. I could feel my Omega instinct screaming at me to make myself smaller, to appease, to submit. But something else stirred too, Something tired of always being the one who had to prove their worth. "You're right," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "You don't know anything about me, but I don't know anything about you either. And I'm the one who's actually vulnerable here, so maybe we could start by assuming good faith instead of expecting the worst?" Silence. Then Imara laughed, bright and delighted. "Oh, I like her. She's staying." Sebastian's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those ice-blue eyes. "We'll see." "There's one more," Cassandra said softly. "Dominic. He's hunting. But you'll meet him tomorrow." The way she said it made me think there was more to that story, but I didn't push. Nathaniel closed his book and stood. "I imagine Elena is exhausted. Perhaps we should let her settle in before the interrogation continues." "It's not an interrogation," Sebastian protested. "No? Then what would you call it?" "Due diligence." Cassandra took my arm gently. "Come on, I'll show you your room." As we left the library, I heard Imara say, $20 says she lasts longer than a month." "Make it 50, Nathaniel replied. "I think she's going to surprise us all." My room was on the second floor, at the end of a hallway lined with portraits of people I didn't recognize. Some in period clothing from centuries past, others more modern. Cassandra explained they were family, though whether that meant biological or chosen, I couldn't tell. With vampires, family seemed to mean something different, something deeper than blood. The room itself stole what little breath I had left. It was easily 3 times the size of my entire apartment. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, draped in soft linens the color of storm clouds. Large windows overlooked the wild garden, curtains tied back to let in the moonlight. There was a writing desk, a wardrobe that could have housed a small family, a reading nook with a cushioned window seat, and a door that led to a private bathroom with an actual clawfoot tub. "It's too much," I whispered. "It's yours," Cassandra corrected, "for as long as you want it." She set my bag down and moved to light a few candles scattered around the room, not because we needed the light, but because the flickering flames made the space feel warmer, more alive. "The house has 6 bedrooms, she continued. "This one has been empty for about 40 years. It's good to have it occupied again." There was a story there. In the careful way she didn't look at me when she spoke. Someone had lived here before, someone who was gone now. "Cassandra," I started, then hesitated. "Why did you really ask me here?" She was quiet for a long moment, standing by the window and looking out at the garden. The moonlight caught her profile, making her look like something carved from marble. Beautiful, and cold, and untouchable. "Do you know what it's like?" she said finally. "To live for so long that you forget what it feels like to be seen?" Really seen. Not as a monster or a myth or a means to an end, but as a person. I thought about the pack meetings where I'd sat in the back, invisible. The family dinners where conversation flowed around me like I was a stone in a river. The way people looked through me rather than at me. "Yes," I said, "I know exactly what that's like." She turned to face me, and there were centuries of loneliness in her amber eyes. "You saw me. A stranger in a coffee shop, and you saw me. Made sure I was cared for, even in small ways. Do you know how rare that is? How precious?" My throat tightened. "I just brought you coffee. You brought me proof that kindness still exists in the world, and I—" She paused, vulnerability flickering across her features. "I needed that reminder. We all did. This coven has been drowning in darkness for too long. We needed light. We needed you." Before I could respond, she moved toward the door. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll talk about everything else. Rules, expectations, how this works. But tonight just breathe. You're safe here, Elena. I promise you that." After she left, I stood in the middle of the room for a long time, trying to process everything that had happened in the span of 24 hours. This morning, I'd been serving coffee in a shop that smelled like burnt sugar. Tonight I was living in a mansion with vampires who apparently needed me to teach them how to be human again. The absurdity of it should have been overwhelming. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. I unpacked slowly, putting my worn clothes in the massive wardrobe where they looked even more pathetic, surrounded by all that empty space. The photograph of my mother went on the nightstand. My books arranged themselves on a shelf that already held volumes in languages I couldn't read. The bathroom was a revelation. Hot water that didn't run out after 5 minutes. Towels that were actually soft. Soap that smelled like lavender instead of industrial chemicals. I stayed in the bath until my fingers pruned, letting the heat work out knots of tension I'd been carrying for so long they'd become part of my skeleton. When I finally climbed into bed, the sheets felt like clouds against my skin. Through the window, I could see the moon hanging full and bright above the garden, and for the first time in 3 months, I fell asleep without crying. I woke to voices arguing downstairs. The sun was up. I could see it streaming through the windows, which confused me until I remembered that the whole vampires burning in sunlight thing was mostly myth. They could handle it, though they preferred darkness. Preferred, but didn't require. I dressed quickly in jeans and the least worn sweater I owned, then made my way downstairs, following the sound of heated discussion. The kitchen was at the back of the house, and it was nothing like I'd expected. Modern appliances sat alongside antique furniture, creating a strange mix of centuries. Imara stood at the stove, which seemed odd until I remembered her comment about feeding me, while Nathaniel sat at a large wooden table reading a newspaper. Sebastian leaned against the counter, arms crossed, scowling at someone I couldn't see yet. "Absolutely irresponsible," he was saying. "You can't just bring someone into this house without proper precautions." "What precautions would satisfy you, Sebastian?" That was a new voice. Male, deep and rough like gravel. "Background check? Psychological evaluation? Blood tests?" "Yes, actually. All of those things. She's not a threat. She's an Omega, for God's sake. Which makes her a vulnerability, a weakness others could exploit." I stepped into the doorway, and all conversation stopped. The 5th member of the coven stood with his back to the window, and my first thought was that he looked like violence barely contained. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell past his collar and eyes so deeply brown they were almost black. He had scars, thin white lines across his knuckles, a more prominent one along his jaw. Unlike the others, who wore their predator nature like a second skin, he wore his like armor. This had to be Dominic. "Elena," Cassandra said, appearing from somewhere behind me. "Good morning. I hope the discussion didn't wake you." "It's fine," I said, though my heart was racing. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Dominic's eyes tracked over me, assessing, not hostile exactly, but not welcoming either, calculating. "So you're the Omega who's supposed to save us all from ourselves." "I'm the Omega who Cassandra invited to stay," I corrected, surprised by my own boldness. "I don't know anything about saving anyone." A ghost of a smile touched his scarred mouth. "At least you're honest about it, Dominic." Cassandra's voice carried a warning. "We discussed this. You discussed it. I was hunting." He moved away from the window, and I noticed he walked with a slight limp. Barely perceptible, but there. But fine. She's here now. Might as well make the best of it. It wasn't exactly a warm welcome, but something in his tone suggested he was willing to reserve judgment. That was more than Sebastian seemed prepared to offer. Imara turned from the stove, carrying a plate piled high with eggs, toast, and what looked like bacon. "Sit," she commanded, pointing at the table. "You need food in you before this family's dysfunction gives you a headache." I sat, and she placed the plate in front of me with a flourish. The smell alone made my stomach growl embarrassingly loud. "When's the last time you had a proper breakfast?" Nathaniel asked, folding his newspaper. "I don't remember." That's what I thought. Imara settled into the chair across from me, chin propped on her hand, watching me with those intelligent brown eyes. "Eat. All of it. Don't even think about arguing." I ate. God, I ate like I was starving, which I realized I had been. Not just for food, but for this. For sitting at a table with others, for being told to eat because someone cared whether I was nourished or not. The conversation gradually resumed around me, though more subdued than before. Nathaniel asked about my background. Carefully, respectfully, never pushing when I hesitated. I told them about the pack, about presenting as Omega, about my mother's death when I was 16, and how everything had fallen apart after that. "Your pack rejected you because you're Omega?" Imara's voice was sharp with anger. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. They wanted strength, I said quietly. Omegas are considered soft, weak, a liability in conflicts. Soft doesn't mean weak, Dominic said from where he stood by the window. Everyone turned to look at him, clearly surprised he was engaging. Some of the most dangerous people I've known were soft-spoken and gentle. Made it easier to underestimate them. Exactly, Cassandra agreed. Elena, being Omega isn't a flaw, it's a gift. You feel things more deeply, connect more easily, see what others miss. Your pack was too foolish to recognize that. Sebastian made a dismissive sound. Sentiment is all well and good, but it doesn't change the reality of our situation. We're vampires. We have enemies, other covens, hunters, territorial disputes. An Omega in the household is a complication. Or an advantage, Nathaniel said mildly. We've become too insular, too disconnected. Elena represents a bridge back to something we've lost. What, humanity? Sebastian's laugh was bitter. We're not human, Nathaniel. We stopped being human a long time ago. Speak for yourself, Imara shot back. Just because you've decided to embrace the monster doesn't mean the rest of us have. The argument was building again, tensions rising like a storm about to break. I could feel it in my chest, that Omega instinct to soothe, to mediate, to bring peace. But I was also exhausted from always being the one who had to smooth things over. Always the one who had to make myself smaller so everyone else could be comfortable. Stop, I said, not loud, not commanding, just firm. And somehow, impossibly, they did. 5 pairs of eyes turned to me. I appreciate the passion, I said carefully, but I'm sitting right here. Maybe instead of arguing about whether I'm a complication or an advantage, you could just let me be a person. I'm not here to fix anyone or bridge anything or prove my worth. Cassandra offered me a place to live, and I accepted. That's it. If that's not enough for some of you, I glanced at Sebastian, then say so now and I'll leave. But I'm not going to sit here and be debated like I'm not in the room. Silence fell, heavy and complete. Then Imara started laughing. Oh, she's definitely staying. I've been trying to get Sebastian to shut up for 200 years, and she did it in 30 seconds. Even Nathaniel smiled. Well said, Elena. Dominic's expression was unreadable, but he gave a small nod that might have been respect. Sebastian surprisingly looked almost chagrined. You're right. That was inappropriate. I apologize. It wasn't warm, but it was honest. I could work with honest. The truth is, Cassandra said, her hand coming to rest on my shoulder, we're all figuring this out as we go. This household has been 5 for a very long time. Adding a 6th changes the dynamic. There will be adjustments, growing pains, but she looked around the table at each of them. We're family. We adapt. We learn. We make it work. Besides, Imara added with a grin, Elena makes Cassandra actually smile. That alone is worth whatever complications come with it. Cassandra's hand tightened on my shoulder, affectionate and protective. Finish your breakfast, she told me softly. Then I'll give you a proper tour of the house. There's a lot to learn. As the conversation shifted to easier topics, plans for the evening, a book Nathaniel wanted to discuss, Imara's thoughts on modern fashion versus historical accuracy, I felt something loosen in my chest. This wasn't my pack. These weren't my people. Not really. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe they could be. Maybe this strange, dysfunctional family of immortal predators and one rejected Omega could actually work. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. 3 weeks passed like a dream I was afraid to wake from. The house revealed itself slowly, room by room, secret by secret. Cassandra took me through the library's hidden alcoves where first editions sat behind glass. Nathaniel showed me the music room on the 3rd floor, with instruments from every era carefully maintained and occasionally played. Imara dragged me through her wardrobe, an entire room dedicated to clothing from the past 3 centuries. and insisted on updating what she called my depressing color palette. Even Sebastian thawed marginally. I caught him watching me sometimes with an expression that was less suspicious and more curious, like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. He'd started leaving books on my nightstand. Classics, philosophy, poetry. Never with a note, never with explanation. Just there when I woke up, an invitation to conversation disguised as coincidence. Dominic remained the most enigmatic. He was gone often, disappearing for days at a time on what Cassandra vaguely referred to as coven business. When he was home, he was quiet, observing more than participating. But I noticed small things, how he always positioned himself between me and the door, protective without being obvious. How he'd return from his mysterious trips with groceries, real food that I could actually eat, stocking the kitchen without fanfare. I learned their rhythms, their quirks, the way centuries of living together had created patterns as intricate as any dance. Imara liked her blood warm and fresh, which meant she went out hunting most nights. Nathaniel preferred the clinical approach, blood banks, medical suppliers, nothing that required actual hunting. Sebastian was particular about everything, from the temperature of his evening drink to the precise arrangement of furniture. Cassandra rarely fed at all, surviving on the bare minimum, which worried me, though I didn't know why. And Dominic. I never saw Dominic feed, never heard him discuss it. It was like that part of his nature simply didn't exist in my presence. They had rules for me, too, though they presented them as guidelines. Don't go out alone after dark. There were other vampires in the city, other covens, and a lone Omega was too tempting a target. Always tell someone where I was going. Keep my phone charged. Wear the bracelet Imara had given me. A delicate silver thing she said would mark me as under their protection. It should have felt restrictive. Instead, it felt like being cared for. I'd gotten a new job at a bookstore 3 blocks away. Something Nathaniel had arranged through connections I didn't ask about. The owner, Mrs. Chen, was human and kind, and didn't ask questions about why I'd moved or where I'd come from. The work was easy, peaceful, shelving books, helping customers, managing the small cafe area. Nothing like the chaos of the coffee shop. I was happy. Genuinely, surprisingly happy. Which is probably why I should have known something would go wrong. It happened on a Thursday evening. I'd just finished my shift and was walking home through the autumn dusk, my breath fogging in the cooling air. The streetlights were just beginning to flicker on, casting pools of amber light across the sidewalk. I had my phone out, texting Imara about dinner plans when I felt it. The prickle of being watched. My Omega instincts flared, every nerve suddenly alert. I stopped walking, pretending to adjust my bag while scanning the street. Nothing obvious, just the usual city sounds, traffic, distant conversation, the rustle of wind through dying leaves. But something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. I started walking faster, taking a route that would keep me on well-lit streets. The house was only 10 minutes away. I could make it. I just had to. A figure stepped out from an alley ahead of me. Male. Vampire. I could tell immediately from the predatory stillness, the way he moved with inhuman grace. He was young-looking, maybe 30 when he was turned, with sandy hair and an easy smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "You're a long way from home, little Omega," he said, his accent suggesting old money and older breeding. I stopped, every instinct screaming. Behind me, I heard footsteps. 2 more figures emerging from the shadows, trapped. "I'm just heading home," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't want any trouble. No one ever does." He stepped closer, and I caught his scent. Blood and expensive cologne and something else. Something rotten underneath. "But you're an interesting problem. See? Word is that the Thorn Coven has taken in a pet. A little Omega playing house with vampires. That's unusual." Thorn. I'd never heard Cassandra or the others use a family name, but apparently they had one. "I'm not a pet," I said, my hand moving slowly toward my pocket where my phone was. "If I could just..." The vampire moved faster than I could track, suddenly inches away, his hand clamping around my wrist. His grip was iron, painful. Don't even think about it. My Omega nature betrayed me then, flooding my system with fear scent that made all 3 vampires inhale sharply. their eyes darkened, pupils dilating, predators responding to prey. "Please," I whispered, hating how small my voice sounded. "They'll know. If you hurt me, they'll know." "Oh, we're counting on it." He leaned closer, his breath cold against my ear. "See? The thorns have gotten too comfortable, too powerful. They need to remember that protection comes with a price. And you—" His grip tightened until I gasped in pain. "You're the message." I didn't think, didn't plan, just acted. I drove my knee up as hard as I could, aiming for his groin. It connected, and even vampires felt that. He stumbled back with a curse, and I ran. Not toward home. That would lead them right to the house. Instead, I ran toward the busier part of the district, toward lights and people and witnesses. My heart hammered in my chest, my breath coming in panicked gasps. Behind me, I heard pursuit. Footsteps too fast to be human, too close for comfort. A hand grabbed my jacket, yanking me backward. I screamed, loud and desperate, just as someone stepped out of a doorway ahead of us. Dominic. He took in the situation in a single glance. Me being held. 3 hostile vampires, the fear stench saturating the air. His expression didn't change, didn't need to. The violence that radiated from him in that moment was enough to make the air feel heavy. "Let her go," he said, his voice flat and cold and absolutely lethal. The vampire holding me laughed, though it sounded nervous. "This doesn't concern you, Thorn. We're just having a conversation." Dominic moved. I didn't see it happen. One moment he was 10 feet away. The next he was there, his hand around the throat of the vampire holding me. The grip released immediately as my attacker was lifted off his feet, making choking sounds that shouldn't have been possible for the undead. "You put your hands on her," Dominic said, still in that terrible, empty voice. "That makes it very much my concern." The other 2 vampires stepped forward, but stopped when Dominic's eyes cut toward them. Whatever they saw there made them reconsider. "Smart choice." "We didn't know," one of them stammered. "We were told she was unprotected, that the Thorns wouldn't care about 1 Omega. You were told wrong." Dominic's grip tightened, and the vampire in his grasp made a horrible wheezing sound. "Who sent you?" "I can't—" Something cracked. Not loud, but sickening. The vampire screamed. "Who sent you?" "Ravencroft. Julian Ravencroft. He wanted to send a message, that's all. We weren't going to seriously hurt her." Dominic dropped him. The vampire crumpled to the ground, cradling what was clearly a broken arm. Vampires healed fast, but broken bones still hurt like hell. "Go back to Ravencroft," Dominic said to all 3 of them. "Tell him if he wants to send messages, he can deliver them himself. Tell him if any of his coven come near Elena again, I'll return the favor 10-fold. Tell him—" He paused, something dark and dangerous crossing his features. "Tell him Dominic Thorne remembers the old ways, and the old ways don't end well for people who threaten what's mine." The vampires fled, actually fled, stumbling over themselves in their haste to get away. Then Dominic turned to me, and the violence drained away so completely, it was like watching a mask fall. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head, then immediately contradicted myself by starting to shake. Adrenaline crash, probably. My wrist throbbed where the vampire had grabbed it. "Let me see." His hands were gentle as they took my arm, examining the bruises already forming. His jaw tightened. "We need to get you home." He didn't let me walk, just picked me up like I weighed nothing, one arm under my knees and the other supporting my back. I should have protested. I was capable of walking. I wasn't completely helpless, but the truth was, I didn't want to. I felt safe for the first time since this had started, wrapped in his strength and his scent of cedar and night air. "How did you find me?" I asked, as he carried me through the streets with that inhuman speed that made everything blur. "You were late. You're never late." He glanced down at me, something fierce in his dark eyes. "I came looking." The house appeared before us, warm light spilling from the windows. Dominic didn't bother with the front door, just took us around the side to a servant's entrance that led directly to the kitchen. The others were there. All of them. They turned as we entered, and I watched understanding dawn across their faces. My disheveled appearance, Dominic carrying me, the fear scent still clinging to my clothes. Cassandra was at my side in an instant, her amber eyes blazing with fury. What happened? Ravencroft's people, Dominic said shortly, setting me carefully on a chair, 3 of them. They were waiting for her. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. I'd never seen Cassandra angry before, not really angry. It was terrifying and magnificent at once. They touched her? One did, briefly. Dominic's voice was cold again. I sent them back with a message, Sebastian swore, sharp and vicious. Nathaniel's face went blank, which somehow seemed more dangerous than rage. Imara was already moving, gathering supplies to tend to my wrist, even though it was minor compared to what could have happened. "This is my fault," Cassandra said, and there was genuine anguish in her voice. "I should have anticipated this. Should have known other covens would see Elena as vulnerability. She's not a vulnerability," Dominic interrupted. "She's family, and anyone who doesn't understand the difference is about to learn." The weight of those words, "she's family," settled over me like a blanket. 3 weeks ago, I'd been a rejected Omega with nothing. Now I was sitting in a kitchen full of vampires who looked ready to go to war over me. "We need to make a formal declaration," Nathaniel said. "Let every coven in the city know that Elena is under Thorn protection, that touching her means answering to all of us." "Agreed," Sebastian said immediately, which shocked me given his earlier reservations. "And we need to address Ravencroft directly. This kind of provocation can't go unanswered." "I'll handle Ravencroft," Dominic said, and something in his tone made even Cassandra pause. "Dominic," I said, "I'll handle it." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken history. Whatever Dominic planned to do, it wasn't going to be diplomatic. Imara finished bandaging my wrist, then sat back on her heels, looking up at me with those warm brown eyes. "You okay, sweetheart?" Was I? I'd been attacked, threatened, used as a pawn in vampire politics I didn't understand. I should have been terrified, should have been packing my bags and running back to my miserable human life where the worst thing I had to worry about was making rent. But looking around at these 5 people, these vampires who'd taken me in, fed me, protected me, called me family, I realized something. I wasn't scared. I was angry. "I'm fine," I said, and meant it, "but we need to talk about this, about what having me here means, about the risks, about—" "No," Cassandra interrupted firmly. "We need to talk about how to keep you safe. Everything else is secondary." "She's right," Nathaniel added. "You're not leaving, Elena. That's not even on the table. We just need to adjust our approach." "Make sure everyone knows you're not alone," Imara said. "Make sure everyone knows the cost of threatening you," Sebastian corrected. They were all looking at me, and I saw it clearly now, what Cassandra had meant that first morning in the coffee shop. They weren't just protecting me, I was changing them, reminding them of something they'd lost. Purpose. Connection. The reason to care about something beyond their own endless existence. "Okay," I said softly. "Okay. We do this together then, as family." Dominic's hand came to rest on my shoulder, warm and solid and grounding. When I looked up, his scarred face held something I hadn't seen before. Not quite a smile, but close. Understanding, maybe. Respect. "Together," he agreed. And despite everything, the attack, the danger, the uncertain future, I felt that same strange certainty I'd felt 3 weeks ago. This was exactly where I needed to be. The formal declaration happened 3 nights later in a place I hadn't known existed, a neutral ground called the Vesper, an underground club where vampires from all the city's covens could meet without violating territorial agreements. Cassandra had prepared me for what to expect, but nothing could have truly readied me for walking into a room full of predators. The club was beautiful in a dangerous way, all dark velvet and candlelight, with music that thrummed through the floor like a heartbeat. Vampires filled the space, some dancing, others gathered in corners conducting business I couldn't begin to guess at. The air was thick with power, centuries of it layered like sediment. I wore one of Imara's dresses, deep emerald green that brought out the color of my eyes. She'd styled my blonde hair in loose waves and insisted on makeup that made me look older, more sophisticated. "You need to look like you belong," she'd said. "Like you're not just some helpless Omega they can intimidate." The Thorn Coven entered together, with me at their center. Protected. Claimed. Conversations stopped as we passed. I felt eyes on us. On me specifically. Assessing. Calculating. My Omega instincts screamed at being the focus of so much predatory attention. But I kept my head up, my breathing steady. I was learning to trust the shield these 5 had become around me. Dominic walked closest, his presence a wall of barely contained violence. Since the attack, he'd been different around me, more present, more protective. He still disappeared on his mysterious errands, but never without telling me when he'd be back. Never without making sure someone else was watching over me. We were here because Nathaniel had called for a convocation, a formal gathering where declarations could be made and witnessed by all. It was old tradition, the kind vampires took seriously because breaking such public promises carried consequences that transcended individual covens. The center of the club opened into a circular space, like a stage. Nathaniel led us there, his quiet, professorial demeanor replaced by something ancient and authoritative. When he spoke, his voice carried through the club with unnatural clarity. "I call witness," he said. And the music stopped. Every vampire in the space turned their attention to us. The Thorn Coven makes formal declaration. A figure emerged from the crowd, tall, silver-haired, with eyes like chips of ice. This had to be Julian Ravencroft, the one who'd sent those vampires after me. He looked exactly like what he was. Old money, old power, old cruelty. "By all means," he said, his voice dripping with false courtesy. "Do enlighten us." Cassandra stepped forward, and I'd never seen her look more regal, more dangerous. "Elena Moreau is claimed under Thorn protection. She is family, bound by oath and blood. Any action against her is action against us all. Any harm done to her will be answered sevenfold. This is our declaration, witnessed and sealed." The formal words hung in the air, binding and absolute. Ravencroft's smile didn't waver. How sentimental. A lone Omega adopted by vampires. One might wonder what service she provides to earn such devotion. The implication was clear, insulting. I felt the thorns tense around me, felt Dominic's hand flex like he was restraining himself from violence, but I'd had enough of being talked about like I wasn't there. Enough of people assuming they knew what I was worth. I stepped forward, out of the protective circle, ignoring Cassandra's sharp intake of breath. Ravencroft's cold eyes fixed on me with predatory interest. "I provide exactly what you've forgotten," I said, my voice carrying clear and steady. Humanity. Compassion. The ability to see beyond power and politics to what actually matters. You look at me and see weakness because I'm Omega, because I'm human, because I don't have your strength or your centuries. But I see you, Julian Ravencroft. I see a creature so old he's forgotten why any of this matters in the first place. Silence. Complete, utter silence. Ravencroft's expression hardened. "Careful, little Omega, that tongue of yours could get you into trouble." "It already has," I agreed. "Your people made that clear, but here's what you don't understand. I'm not afraid anymore. Not of you. Not of any vampire in this room. Because I've found something worth protecting, and that makes me dangerous in ways you can't comprehend. You?" He laughed, cold and mocking. "You're one rejected Omega against—" "She's not alone," Dominic said, moving to stand beside me. Not in front of me. Beside me. Equal. "None of us are," Imara added, taking position on my other side. Sebastian, Nathaniel, and Cassandra closed ranks, creating a united front. 5 vampires and 1 Omega, standing together against a room full of predators. "The declaration stands," Cassandra said. "Challenge it if you dare." For a long moment, I thought Ravencroft might actually do it. Thought this might end in violence that I'd inadvertently started with my inability to stay quiet. But something shifted in his expression. Not respect exactly, but recognition. He'd underestimated us, and he knew it. "The Thorn Coven has made its position clear," he said finally. "I have no interest in testing their resolve. The misunderstanding will not be repeated." It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement. which in vampire politics was almost the same thing. Nathaniel nodded once. Then we understand each other. The music started again, conversations resumed, and just like that, the tension broke. We'd won. Not through violence, but through unity. Through making it clear that I wasn't just tolerated by the thorns. I was family, and family was worth fighting for. As we moved away from the center floor, back toward a private booth Cassandra had reserved, I felt the weight of what had just happened settle over me. I'd been formally claimed by a vampire coven. Protected, yes, but also bound to them in ways I was only beginning to understand. That was incredibly stupid, Sebastian said once we were seated, but there was no heat in it. Almost affection? You could have gotten yourself hurt, but I didn't, I pointed out. And he needed to hear it. They all did. I'm not a pet or a plaything. I'm part of this family, and that means I get a voice. Damn right you do, Imara said, raising her glass of blood wine in salute. To Elena, who has bigger balls than half the vampires in this room. To Elena, the others echoed. Dominic was quiet beside me, his dark eyes thoughtful. After a moment, he leaned closer, his voice low enough that only I could hear. You were right, what you said, about why you're here. It's not about what you provide or what service you offer. It's about remembering what matters. And what matters? I asked softly. This. He gestured to the table, to our group. Connection. Loyalty. Having something worth protecting beyond our own existence. You gave us that back. His hand found mine under the table. Warm and solid and real. Not possessive. Not controlling. Just there. A point of connection. We stayed at the Vesper for hours, and I watched as other vampires approached our table, some curious, others respectful, a few openly hostile but unwilling to act on it. Word had spread fast. The Thorn Coven's Omega was off limits, and the consequences of forgetting that had been made very clear. But more than that, I saw something else. I saw other vampires watching us with something that looked almost like envy. The way we laughed together, teased each other, operated as a unit. We had what so many of them had lost over their endless years, genuine connection. We left as dawn approached, the sky just beginning to lighten with the promise of morning. The walk home was peaceful, the city still mostly asleep. Imara walked ahead with Sebastian, arguing good-naturedly about something that had happened decades ago. Nathaniel and Cassandra followed, their heads close together in quiet conversation. Dominic stayed beside me, his presence a comfort I'd come to rely on. Can I ask you something? I said, as we turned onto our street. Always. Why did you really come looking for me that night? The others would have noticed eventually that I was late. You didn't have to. Yes, I did. He stopped walking, turning to face me fully. The pre-dawn light caught the scar on his jaw, making it stand out stark and white. Do you know what it's like, Elena, to live for centuries and never find something that makes you feel alive? To go through the motions of existence without purpose? I thought about my time before the coffee shop, before Cassandra, before this strange family. Yes, I whispered. I know exactly what that's like. You changed that. For all of us. But especially... He paused, seeming to struggle with words. Especially for me. I've done terrible things. Been a monster in truth, not just name. I'd accepted that's all I'd ever be. And then you came into our lives and looked at me like I was worth something beyond violence. Like I could be more than what I'd been. Dominic, I came looking for you because the thought of anything happening to you was unbearable. Because somewhere in the past 3 weeks you stopped being Cassandra's Omega and became ours, mine. His hand came up to cup my face, thumb brushing across my cheekbone. If that's too much, if I'm overstepping, I stopped his words with a kiss. It was brief, gentle, but it carried everything I couldn't quite articulate. Gratitude, affection, the beginning of something that might become love given time. When I pulled back, his eyes were wide with surprise and something that looked like wonder. Not too much, I said softly. Not even close. A smile transformed his face. making him look younger, less burdened. Good. That's... The others had stopped ahead of us, watching with varying degrees of amusement and approval. Imara was grinning like she'd won a bet. Knowing her, she probably had. "Are you two finished?" Cassandra called, but her voice was warm with affection. "Some of us would like to get inside before full sunrise." We walked the rest of the way home together, and something about the scene felt significant. 6 people, 5 vampires and 1 Omega, returning to a house that had stopped being just a building and become a home. Broken pieces that had found each other, and somehow formed something whole. The months that followed fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal. I continued working at the bookstore, though now I arrived and left with escort, usually Dominic, sometimes Imara, occasionally Sebastian when he was feeling protective. The other covens learned quickly that the Thorn Coven's declaration wasn't just words. We were a united front, and testing that unity came with consequences no one wanted to face. The house came fully alive. Dinners became a nightly ritual where I cooked while the others gathered, sharing their days. Imara taught me about fashion across the centuries. Nathaniel introduced me to literature I'd never dreamed of reading. Sebastian slowly revealed a dry sense of humor that made me laugh until my sides hurt. Cassandra and I had morning coffee at the kitchen table, just the two of us, continuing the routine that had started everything. And Dominic. Dominic became something I hadn't expected. Not just a protector or a friend, but a partner. Someone who understood darkness because he'd lived in it, but chose light anyway because he'd seen what I'd shown him, that even monsters could choose to be more. 6 months after that night at the Vesper, I woke to find the house decorated with flowers. Every surface, every room, covered in blooms of every color. I found Cassandra in the kitchen, smiling that rare, soft smile she only showed to family. "What's all this?" I asked, taking in the roses and lilies and flowers I couldn't name. "A celebration," she said. 6 months ago, I asked you to take a chance on us, to trust that maybe, just maybe, we could be family. You did. And in doing so, you saved us all. I didn't save anyone. You did." Imara appeared in the doorway, stunning in a dress the color of sunset. "You saved us from ourselves. From isolation, from forgetting what it means to care about something beyond survival." Nathaniel and Sebastian followed, both dressed formally. Even Dominic wore a suit, though he looked vaguely uncomfortable in it. "We wanted to do something to honor that," Nathaniel explained. "To honor you. So we're having a party. Nothing too elaborate, just every vampire in the city who doesn't actively want to eat you." Imara interrupted cheerfully. "A gathering," Nathaniel continued, shooting Imara a look, "to formally celebrate your place in this family, to show everyone what we've built here." I looked around at them. These 5 incredible, impossible people who'd taken in a rejected Omega and given her not just a home, but a purpose, a family, a future. I don't know what to say. I managed around the lump in my throat. "Say you'll get dressed," Cassandra said gently. "Imara has picked out something perfect naturally. The guests arrive at sunset. The party was beautiful. Vampires filled the house and garden, many of whom I recognized from the Vesper, but this time there was no hostility, no testing. Just acknowledgement of what had become undeniable. The Thorn Coven had found something rare and precious, and we were willing to protect it with everything we had. I moved through the evening in a daze of happiness, accepting congratulations and curious questions, telling the story of how Cassandra and I had met in that coffee shop that smelled like burnt sugar. Some vampires seemed skeptical that a relationship built on small kindnesses could be so transformative, but others looked at us with something like longing, as if we'd found a secret they desperately wanted to understand. As midnight approached, Dominic found me on the balcony, looking out at the garden where fairy lights had been strung through the trees. "Overwhelmed?" he asked, sliding an arm around my waist. "Happily," I admitted, leaning into him. "A year ago, I was sleeping on a lumpy mattress in an apartment that smelled like mildew, convinced I'd never belong anywhere. And now you have 5 vampires who would burn the world down before letting anything happen to you," he finished. "Funny how life works. Death, Technically, you're all dead. Undead, he corrected. There's a difference. We're very much alive, thanks to you. I turned in his arms, looking up at his scarred face, features I'd memorized over countless mornings and evenings, in quiet moments and dangerous ones. I love you, I said, the words feeling right, inevitable. His expression softened into something that was pure wonder. I love you too. All of us do, in our own ways. You're the best thing that's happened to this family in centuries. The best thing that's happened to me, I corrected. He kissed me then, slow and deep and full of promise. Around us, the party continued, music and laughter and the sound of family celebrating. When we finally broke apart, I saw the others watching from the doorway. Cassandra with her secret smile, Imara openly crying happy tears, Nathaniel looking pleased, even Sebastian showing something that might have been joy. Come on, Dominic said, taking my hand. Let's go be with our family. Our family. Not his, not theirs. Ours. We rejoined the party, and I spent the rest of the night surrounded by the people I loved most. At some point, Cassandra pulled me aside, into the quiet of her study away from the noise. I need to tell you something, she said, her amber eyes serious. That morning in the coffee shop, when you brought me the croissant, I was planning for that to be my last sunrise. I was going to walk into the dawn and let it end. My heart stopped. Cassandra. I'd lived so long, seen so much, and I couldn't find a reason to continue. The emptiness was crushing, and then you... Her voice broke slightly. You saw me. Cared about me when you had every reason not to. Showed me that even after centuries, connection was still possible. You saved my life, Elena, literally. And in doing so, you saved all of us. Tears spilled down my cheeks. I didn't know. I know. That's what made it so powerful. You helped because it was who you are, not because you expected anything in return. She pulled me into a hug, fierce and tight. Thank you. For everything. For being exactly who you are. When we returned to the party, I felt different. Lighter. I'd spent so long believing I had no purpose, no value. My pack had rejected me, cast me aside as worthless. But they'd been wrong. My purpose wasn't strength in the traditional sense. It wasn't fighting or dominance or power. It was this: connection, compassion, the ability to see people beyond their surfaces and care about them anyway, to bring light into darkness, hope into despair, family to those who'd forgotten what family meant. I was Omega, and that wasn't a weakness. It was exactly, precisely, what this strange family of vampires had needed. What I'd needed too. The party lasted until dawn, when the vampires finally retreated inside, and I was left standing in the garden with the first rays of sunlight warming my face. The house behind me was full of sleeping immortals who'd become my family. The city beyond the gates held a future that actually felt worth living. I thought about that coffee shop, about the girl I'd been 6 months ago, broken and alone and convinced she'd always be invisible. She seemed like a stranger now, someone from a different lifetime. Because I'd been found. I'd been seen. I'd been chosen. Not by a pack that wanted me to be something I wasn't, but by a family that loved me exactly as I was, and that made all the difference.